It's been said that jazz is freedom put to music. A free flow of notes emanating directly from the soul. It grew from the tortured souls of slaves yearning to be free. Buffalo was a sanctuary for escaping slaves, where the road to freedom brought them to the Niagara River for safe crossing into Canada. Buffalo was where African Americans built their own church and helped begin the nation's first civil rights movement. And where musicians of color established a club that would produce some of the best jazz in the nation, a legacy still very much alive to this day.
Rich Newberg reports. Buffalo Soul. The legacy plays on, with contributing reports by Milas Hairston.
If African Americans in Buffalo came to the Michigan Street Baptist Church to set their spirits free, they gathered at the Colored Musicians Club across the street and down the block to celebrate that freedom through music. The legends of jazz played here, and careers of young budding musicians were made here. And the legacy plays on.
Then there's God shouting. Then now shouting.
The soul comes from slavery. And in order for them to survive, they would chant and chant and chant. If we chant long enough, maybe God will hear us. Maybe God will hear us.
The music born of struggle and strife still finds expression through African American singers and musicians in Buffalo.
It started on the riverboat. Yeah. Put that bale of cotton down. Come on, get on the boat here. And they play on the boat. That's how it started, on the boats. And that's our music. That's the black man's music is jazz.
And it's the first love of Boyd Lee Dunlap, who grew up in poverty in Buffalo and, like so many black musicians before him, lived the blues before he played them.
You know we've been through. It takes all that to develop, so you just can't be a millionaire and have soul now. You know what I mean? You can't have a pepper steak and all that gets soul. You gotta have cornbread, sweet water, flatbread, big cotton.
In the segregated world of the early 1900s, African American musicians in Buffalo were not permitted to join the White Musicians Union. So in 1917, they formed their own local, 533.
From the black band's point of view, this gave them access to more places because now they had the card, they had the union card. They had more engagements, and they had to be paid the union wage.
Buffalo, with its dozens of nightclubs and dance halls, became one of the hottest jazz towns in the country. Little Harlem, the Moonglow, the Town Casino, just to name a few.
And when I got here, like you could say, it blew my mind because everybody was blowing. Everything was happening. Every groove you want to mention was groove.
And just about every big name in jazz, including Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington, played that Buffalo groove, paid the union first, played the major clubs, and then often moved on to a different kind of club at 145 Broadway, the Colored Musicians Club, where they would let loose until the sun came out.
Jam sessions where people would just open up and play like they've never played before.
Here's a shot of Dizzy Gillespie on piano in the early days in the club, with Buffalo's late Irvin Shep Shepard over Dizzy's shoulder, Miles Davis peeking around the corner, and former Judge Wilbur Trammell on saxophone.
The place was jumping. It would stay open until 5 o'clock in the morning, maybe 6 o'clock in the morning. You go out, the sun is shining, and you're saying, my God, you know, how can I get home?
The club was formally chartered in 1935, But African American musicians had been socializing together since their local union was formed. The building gave them a meeting place and a place where they could showcase their talents to club owners and big-name band musicians who might invite the Buffalo players to join them on the road.
Sometimes these guys would like the way you play, or just kind of strike up a conversation. You just travel all the way around.
The club would come to symbolize the best in jazz, and people packed the house to experience it.
You can hardly get up the stairwell because there was people lined up and down the stairwell.
But times would change with the turbulent 1960s. Frustration in the inner city led to riots in Buffalo, driving out businesses. Urban renewal changed neighborhoods, and many of the old clubs were torn down in the process.
Elvis Presley.
And the type of music people wanted to hear also changed.
The music kind of changed, you know, because now rhythm and blues and soul music was starting to take over, rock and roll. And jazz sort of was kind of being phased out behind that kind of music.
In 1969, Local 533 was forced to merge with the white musicians' Local 43 in the name of civil rights. But that merger would have negative consequences for many of Buffalo's African-American musicians. While society moved toward integration and equal opportunity in schools, employment, and housing, Buffalo's black musicians knew they would lose not only their union's identity to a union about 5 times the size, but also the opportunity to find work.
It was a loss of work, a loss of their treasury. The treasury got swallowed up to pay off some or most of Local 43's debts. The only thing they were able to get to retain for themselves was the building, which they had signed off to the Colored Musicians Club many years previously.
Yeah. Now he's the one who looked like...
The old-timers still have each other and their memories of another era. But jobs for many these days are few and far between.
We have nowhere to work. There's nowhere to work now. If any place to work, they got the white boys in there now.
Charles Reedy, who once played with an all-white band out of Niagara Falls, his hometown, had joined the newly merged Buffalo Union, Local 92, with the hope of finding steady work.
I joined the 92nd in 1972, I think it was. Since I've been in that union, I have yet to have a call for a job.
But Dick Reederer, vice president of Local 92, says whenever there were opportunities for blacks and whites to play together, the only thing that really mattered was how well a musician could play.
Play a certain style of music and played it well. That was what was paramount as far as importance, and not particularly what he looked like.
Integrated big bands are still around. This is the Jim White Apollo Big Band playing at a Buffalo fundraiser or the Colored Musicians Club. As for the club's future, it will be in the hands of the new generation of musicians who are now learning the basics from the masters.
We don't know who we got out there. We might have some Miles and Diz and Billie Holidays or whatever.
Whatever the future might hold, there are nights when the club relives its old glory, a packed house with a crowd that wants to share in the legacy.
Soothes my soul, kind of. You know, I come here, I hear the music, soothes my soul, makes me feel better on the inside, so I love it.
It's the love of jazz that keeps the Colored Musicians Club alive, the music born of struggle and strife that still finds expression through African-American musicians in Buffalo, and the legacy plays on. During the last 3 decades, Al Tinney was as familiar to the Buffalo jazz scene as Louis Armstrong was to the world of jazz.
He was the Louis Armstrong of Buffalo. You know, this cat is bad. And when I say bad, I don't mean like this. I mean top shelf.
That was the beginning of my life, was this day here.
And like Armstrong, Al Tinney was an innovator and a creator.
I think safely we can say that Al Tinney was one of the founding fathers of modern jazz music.
He worked with George Gershwin when he was only 14 years old. And even appeared on stage in the original 1935 Broadway production of Porgy and Bess. Al's role was to lead a children's band on stage.
I had just come out of the Gershwin thing, and I brought a lot of the inner voice changes, you know, with me, and not knowing that it was going to set a precedent, you know, of bebop.
When he turned 19, Al became a band leader in a Harlem club called Monroe's Uptown House, with an up-and-coming saxophonist by the name of Charlie Parker joining the ranks under Al. This is when modern jazz, or bebop, began to find its voice. The great drummer Max Roach greatly admired Al Tinney.
He would put fire on that stage when we had that little band down there with Victor Coulson and Charlie Parker and the rest of us.
Al Tinney made only one recording in those earlier days in 1957 with a group called the Jive Bombers. He rejected the sometimes decadent lifestyle that permeated the jazz scene in New York City and moved to Buffalo in 1968 to start a family after marrying Buffalo native Lily Williams. And though he was ready to give up jazz, he soon became a major player on the Buffalo music scene. Big band leader Carol McLaughlin, seen here playing at the Colored Musicians Club with Al, says people would simply marvel at the way he tickled the keyboard.
And while we were playing, I noticed this one patron sliding over to the piano. He was dancing, but he kept dancing up close to the piano. And finally, he looked at Al and said, "My God, you have happy fingers," because he wasn't listening to the music anymore, just watching Al's fingers work out on the piano and say, "My God, you have happy fingers."
Al Tinney passed away on December 11th, 2002. He is remembered not only for his incredible contributions to jazz, but also as a teacher and a mentor to younger musicians, and a friend to many people. 4 days after his death, Peggy Farrell, who became his companion and vocalist after Al lost his wife Lily, sang a tribute to Al Tinney at the Colored Musicians Club.
Thank you. I love you, Al. God bless you.
He was totally tolerant of everyone and everybody, and he was extremely kind and generous. He would share all his knowledge with his fellow musicians and young musicians.
Hey, Mr. Cat, I mean, I'm telling you like it is, he was just a great cat. He was a good friend to you. And as far as his music is concerned, any question you ask me, he had it for you.
What was he able to teach you?
Everything. Just how to be a jazz player, how to be a big band conductor, everything.
What he brought to the piano, magic.
Gershwin was a major influence on Al Tinney, and those distinctive blue notes found their way into the bebop style of jazz that Tinney helped create. And for 3 decades, Buffalo was blessed with a true giant of jazz who never craved fame, just an opportunity to play the music he loved and pass on a few pointers to younger musicians lucky enough to have crossed his path.
I like that too.
Music filled the soul and got people on their feet in the Queen City, but it wasn't the only reason Buffalo was on the move.
People was working there, and everybody came to Buffalo, and business was booming.
When I was a young man living in this city, everybody had a job.
It may be hard to believe now, but in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, Buffalo was considered by many African Americans as the city of opportunity. Those who lived the life say the area's industrial boom, led by the auto and steel industries, offered a chance for a better life.
I heard about you could get paid by the hour, and I had never heard of anybody getting paid by the hour.
Electa Corton and her friend Mary Chappelle are both 97 years young. Chappelle, who moved to Buffalo in 1935, says African Americans were recruited from the South and got jobs in steel plants because immigrants refused to do the work.
Europeans said they'd commit suicide before they swallowed that heat in those 3 plants. They couldn't take it.
The jobs that African Americans often were given or allowed to accept in this period were the jobs that would have been labeled Negro work.
Dr. Felix Armfield is an associate professor of history at Buffalo State College and has done extensive research on Buffalo's black community.
That community in Buffalo of the 1920s and 30s and 40s is by and large a working class community.
I did the housekeeping just like everybody else. You got $1 a day, a sandwich, and a token.
But Eva Noles was capable of much more. Eventually, a dare led to Eva Noles making history in Buffalo.
I took the dare. I applied for to become a student.
Noles broke the color barrier when she became the first African American to train as a nurse in Buffalo. Buffalo City Hospital, the forerunner of today's Erie County Medical Center, was the proving ground.
They never heard that blacks were not accepted. If you wanted to be, for training, you had to go to New York, Chicago, Baltimore.
Noles' nursing breakthrough made headlines in newspapers across the country. But in Buffalo, it was difficult getting papers here to tell the story.
In those early days, we had 5 black newspapers. 5. They would not put it in their papers until they saw my license. In fact, I argued with a patient right here in Buffalo. You're not an RN. Nurses can't be, black nurses can't be RNs.
The one-time director of nursing at Roswell Park Cancer Institute made history and opened a door that had been closed to African Americans in Buffalo.
Eventually, from that, all the hospitals began to accept blacks in their schools, and every hospital had a school.
Some scholars believe Eva Noles is one of Buffalo's uncrowned queens. The idea for Uncrowned Queens, which eventually led to a website and a book, was born from plans for the centennial celebration of the Pan Am Expo in the Queen City. Dr. Peggy Brooks Bertram.
Because there were no projects that really looked at the contributions of African American women, we decided that that's what we'd like to do.
Dr. Brooks Bertram and Dr. Barbara Nevergold say they've documented more than 500 uncrowned queens in Buffalo.
They built this community by building their churches first, and from their churches, building their schools, building social organizations, building networks that reach far beyond Buffalo, as a matter of fact.
Snapshots of the life. The photos taken by Dr. Nevergold's father, the Reverend W.B. Seals, show the tapestry of the city's African-American community.
What the pictures show are how people lived because he went into the living rooms.
Reverend Seals, who led the faithful at the Cold Spring Baptist Church, used those living rooms and the streets of the city as a living photography studio. Photography was a sideline job for Reverend Seals. Now, some of his pictures are on display at the Buffalo and Erie County Historical Society. Dr. Nevergold hopes her father's work inspires future generations.
I hope that they'll take a look at the photographs and also a look at the history of the time.
When we come back, it's a preservation area like no other. You won't believe your eyes when you see how landmarks tied to history and visions for the future are coming together in downtown Buffalo.
Sweet, sweet sound in your
upon the hearts of those that can finance us to see that this building is put back into shape.
Prayer and song give new energy to the Michigan Street Baptist Church.
It gives me an excitement.
Bishop William Henderson is the church caretaker. The Michigan Street Baptist Church once served as a portal to freedom for runaway slaves. Their hiding place was this tiny hole in the basement. But that history and much more was nearly lost because of serious structural problems. There were 11 layers of roofing on the building.
It was just a miracle of God that the roof, with the weight of the snow, the damp snow, didn't cave it in.
We brought you the story of the Michigan Street Baptist Church several years ago. At that time, there was talk of restoring this landmark. Big plans with an even bigger price tag. But today, that talk is much closer to becoming reality.
The roof has been completed. The rafters are stabilized. The back wall that was bulging out has been partially repaired.
The bishop's prayers are being answered thanks to the Buffalo Niagara Freedom Station Coalition. The coalition has been able to secure more than $500,000 in the past year to preserve this landmark. Buffalo City Court Judge and Coalition Board Member Robert Russell.
We're hoping that this could be a centerpiece for tourism here in the city of Buffalo. Not only does it represent a part of history, Buffalo's history, but in addition, it also represents part of national history.
Much of the exterior work on the Nash House, which sits behind the Michigan Street Baptist Church, has been completed. It was home to the church's longtime leader, the Reverend J. Edward Nash Sr. Students have helped catalog what is being called a treasure trove of history. Reverend Nash left behind books, papers, and letters with links to the early civil rights struggle.
And so the move is to start the interior, get the House Museum completed, in preparation for 2005, although it should be ready by this time next year.
The Nash House, Michigan Street Baptist Church, and Colored Musicians Club are all part of the city's recently designated Michigan Street Preservation Area. The designation aims to preserve Black history as well as nurture development and cultural tourism. The plan appears to be working. Bonnie Ryder is the new kid on the block. The former Buffalo public school teacher wants to turn this building, just a short walk from the church, into the Mud Pies Children's Museum.
We have an interactive museum for kids.
Some of the exhibits will focus on Black history and include the Underground Railroad.
But we want to make sure that they understand that the Underground Railroad developed because of basic brutality to begin with. And we want to make sure that the story is told not in a romanticized way, but in a realistic way.
Authenticity is the key to heritage tourism. And in Buffalo, what you see is a real part of history.
You don't guess so?
Here at the Colored Musicians Club, the music and the legacy play on, despite all the changes in society. The hope now is to restore this old landmark and keep it active so that visitors from around the country and around the world can also get a glimpse into the soul of a city that is still in the jazz groove. For Milas Hairston, I'm Rich Newberg. Good night.
The things that went on up here in this building had an impact on the cultural fabric of African Americans in Buffalo.
It was like if you didn't go through Buffalo, you haven't lived.
This was the proving ground. All plays, acts, dance, things came from New York here first.
I think Buffalo's African American community has made enormous contributions, not only to social and cultural, but politically and economically as well.
We give free music lessons up here, and we teach the kids.
Okay, not bad, not bad.
That's a legacy. That's something that you have to do.
Ready, play.